Hi, and welcome to Level 6, Lieutenant. Today we're going to be working with solving equations with a variable on both sides. The objective/goal for this lesson is to solve equations when there are variables on both sides of the equation. Remember, you're going to want to make sure that you write this down on your salmon color goal sheet. So now we're going to talk about vocabulary. We only have one word this time. The word is identity. The definition is an equation that is true for every value. A characteristic or helpful hint that I think of when I see identity is identical. Your identity means that you're identical to yourself. A example would be 4 equals 4. A non-example would be 3 equals 6. Okay, so now we're going to get into the meat of the lesson. Alrighty, so as I said before, we are solving equations with variables on both sides. And just like every other lesson, there is a specific procedure that you will need to do in order to solve these types of equations. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is simplify each side of the equation. So when you're working with equations with variables on both sides, it can get very messy. So you want to make sure that you simplify each side before you start doing anything else. Because once we start getting into the rest of the procedure, you might notice that if you add or subtract, multiply or divide before you simplify, you're going to get either 1, the wrong answer, or 2, very confused. So step 2 is to move all of the variables or terms with variables on one side of the equation and all the terms without variables to the other side. You're going to do this by adding or subtracting, which is adding the opposite. So my example here, I have 2x plus 3 equals 4x plus 6. In order to get rid or to move one to one side and one to the other, I would subtract 2x here. And I make sure I do it by both sides. And then I'm going to subtract 6. And now my next step in the procedure, oh good grief, I'm so sorry, states that we're going to eliminate what is attached to the variable by performing the opposite operation, so multiplication or division. So what that means is, so if we're using the same equation of 2x plus 3 equals 4x plus 6, and we do our full step 2, we're going to end up with negative 3 equals 2x. So we still have something attached to that x. We're going to want to divide by 2, and we're going to do that to both sides. And we're going to end up with x equals negative 3 halves. Alrighty, so then we're going to go to step 4. Step 4 says when your variable is by itself on one side of the equation, you are finished. Again, make sure that the variable is positive and your answer is written in lowest terms. Negative 3 halves, you can keep it like this, or you can reduce it down to negative 1 1/2. And just like every other procedure in this chapter, you always can go back and check your answer to make sure that you got it right. Okay? So here is our first example. We have 12x minus 4 equals 3x minus 31. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is subtract 12x from both sides. So as you can see, 12x minus 4 and 3x minus 31 are in the simplest terms that they can get. So from there, we can subtract to get the variables on one side. I would recommend doing the subtraction of variables and then the subtraction of everything else in 2 separate steps just so you don't get confused. So after we subtract 12x from both sides, we're going to end up with negative 4 equals negative 9x minus 31. From here, you're going to want to get rid of everything that also is still not attached to the x variable, and that's going to be the negative 31. So you're going to add the opposites. You're going to add 31 to both sides. Once you do this, you're going to end up with 9, or negative 9x equals 27. So from there, You're going to divide both sides by -9. And when you do that, you're going to end up with x equals -3. And again, go ahead, plug that right back into the original equation. Once you do that, you're going to realize that -3 is the only possible answer for this equation. And as we're continuing on, so with multi-step equations, there may be some special situations that you're going to have to be on the lookout for. So the first one is if the variable drops out on both sides of the equation and what is left is not equal to the answer, it means no solution. So if that means you end up with something that looks like 0 equals -14, that means there's no solution. Since there's no variable left, we haven't been able to solve for it. The other situation that we could possibly have is that the variable drops out of both sides and the equation of both sides of the equation and is left with, and both of the answers are equal to each other. This brings us to our vocabulary word, identity. So say we were solving an equation and we ended up with 4 equals 4. It would mean that it's identity. It wouldn't mean that there's no solution. It just means that the answer is the identity. So I have a couple examples for us. So the first one is 7x plus 3 equals 7x minus 4. So following our steps, first step, we're going to subtract 7x from both sides. When we do that, we're going to be left with 3 equals -4. So as stated above, in order to get an answer, our answer is just going to be no solution. Next example we have, so we have 4 minus d equals -1, because remember, when there's nothing in front of the parenthesis, but there's a negative, just consider it as a 1, -1 times d minus 4. So when we do that, first we want to make sure that we do our distributive property, because who knows, maybe we'll come up with something really cool. So we're going to get 4d equals -1d, or -d plus 4. When we do that, we're going to end up with 4 minus d equals 4 minus d. And that in turn means that we have an identity. Here you'll see the worksheet examples. Go ahead, you can go through those. Also, the final G question. Here it asks, explain how to determine whether an equation is an identity. Remember, on your goal sheet, you also have to fill in your final G question answers. If you have any other questions, you can check this YouTube link out. And then here are your activity options for level 6.